NATO dominates daily news cycles during global crises, yet the underlying mechanics of the alliance remain largely invisible to the public. To track how this organization actually functions, we'll build a four-part NATO threat matrix to organize the shifting pressures of modern security. It starts with a logistical reality. NATO lacks its own massive standing army. Instead, it coordinates the military assets of 32 sovereign nations. Analyzing global security requires viewing NATO as a modular operating system, one that must constantly update its infrastructure and patch its vulnerabilities to maintain a credible deterrent. Labeled the first column of the matrix, the political promise. In 1949, 12 nations gathered in Washington to sign a treaty designed to contain the Soviet Union and prevent a Third World War. The founders were driven by a specific psychological fear that a traumatized post-war Europe would lack the will to resist Soviet expansion, leaving individual states vulnerable to political blackmail. This led to the creation of Article 5, which is frequently misunderstood. Legally, it is a promise for members to consult with one another. It does not serve as an automatic trigger for war. To make this promise credible, the U.S. employed a tripwire strategy. By physically stationing American troops in West Germany, they ensured that any Soviet advance would immediately involve the full weight of the United States military. NATO's original architecture functioned as a psychological shield, relying entirely on the threat of American retaliation to hold the front line. Column 2 is labeled Expansion and the Peace Dividend. The sudden 1989 collapse of the Berlin Wall and the subsequent dissolution of the Warsaw Pact forced a massive system update. Step by step, nations formerly under Soviet control pushed to join the alliance, seeking a permanent security guarantee to protect their newfound independence from Moscow. This expansion created a persistent historical narrative used by modern Russia, the claim that the West made a formal legal promise to never move NATO jurisdiction toward the East. This claim originates from a February 1990 meeting where U.S. Secretary of State James Baker verbally suggested to Mikhail Gorbachev that NATO would move not 1 inch eastward if Germany reunified. However, President George H.W. Bush immediately rejected the idea, informing his staff that he would not negotiate over the future of the alliance. The not 1 inch proposal was killed internally by the U.S. within weeks. When the final 2+4 reunification treaty was signed, it explicitly allowed for NATO enlargement. The Soviet Union signed the treaty, ratified it, and accepted billions in financial aid, leaving the not 1 inch claim without legal standing. For column 3, label it the Article 5 trigger. Historically, the only time NATO has ever invoked its collective defense clause was in response to the September 11th terrorist attacks on the United States. During the initial war on terror, Vladimir Putin acted as an ally, providing NATO with critical logistical support and transit corridors into Afghanistan. The relationship fractured in 2003 when the U.S. invaded Iraq without a UN mandate. Moscow viewed the intervention as a crossing of a strategic red line, signaling the end of post-Cold War cooperation. Relations deteriorated further as Russia launched military interventions in Georgia in 2008 and the annexation of Crimea in 2014. These incursions forced NATO to pivot. After years of focusing on counterterrorism in the Middle East, the alliance realized its own European borders were once again physically exposed. The final column of our matrix is system vulnerabilities. The first is logistics. Moving a tank from Germany to Lithuania currently requires navigating the disparate customs regulations, rail gauges, and bridge weight limits of multiple sovereign nations. Standardizing this infrastructure is the current priority for the Joint Support and Enabling Command. They are working to reduce the time it takes to move large bodies of troops across Europe from 15 days down to 10. Vulnerability 2 is cyber warfare. NATO policy now explicitly states that a cumulative series of cyber attacks on a member nation can trigger an Article 5 military response. To patch this, the alliance runs Locked Shields in Estonia, a massive simulation where multinational teams defend against advanced digital attacks on power plants and transit networks. The third vulnerability is internal political unity. This includes Turkey's strategic hedging with Russia and the persistent possibility of a United States withdrawal, which would leave the alliance without its primary military coordinator. Internal bureaucracy, digital infrastructure, and fragile political unity now present as much risk to the alliance's stability as foreign ballistic missiles. Looking at the completed matrix, we can see the full scale of the transformation, from a 12-nation political promise into a 32-nation bureaucratic shield for 1 billion people. The 2022 invasion of Ukraine refocused the alliance on its 1949 priority, preventing large-scale territorial war within Europe. Executing that mission today requires more than just political will. It demands the constant management of the logistical and digital vulnerabilities we've identified. Use this matrix to analyze the structural pressures behind the next headline you read about defense spending or Article 5. You now have the framework to see how the system